Welcome to Storycraft Portal, where every tale hides a secret, a storm of emotion, and a truth that pulls you in and doesn't let go. Today's story takes us inside a seemingly quiet home in Long Island, New York, but what authorities discovered there was nothing short of a nightmare. Nearly 100 cats, some alive, others tragically dead, including over 24 kittens, were found inside a house that had become a prison of filth, death, and silence. The air was thick with ammonia, the walls soaked in decay, and the freezer, meant for food, held lifeless kittens wrapped like forgotten things. This isn't just a story about animal cruelty. It's about the isolation of a man, a disturbing descent into madness, and a neighborhood forced to confront the horror it never saw coming. No one noticed when the house at the end of Sycamore Street began to die. It was slow, like rot setting in beneath fresh paint. The neighbors, busy with their lives, didn't pay much attention to the old man who lived alone after his wife passed. Stephen Glantz, 75, quiet and strange, but seemingly harmless. Until one evening, a deliverman reported a foul, chemical-like stench wafting from the broken front door. That call brought the authorities, and with them, a horror that silenced the block. What they found inside that home would unearth a secret buried under years of filth, grief, and madness. Cats, dozens of them, mewling, hiding, suffering. And far worse, small, lifeless kittens wrapped and frozen, as if time had stopped for them. The rescuers wore masks, but nothing could shield them from the smell or the truth. And this was just the front room. What lay deeper was worse. The officers stepped inside, but what met them was not just squalor. It was a suffocating wall of ammonia, decay, and fear. Cats darted across their feet, hissing, some limping, some too weak to move. The wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, the floors sticky with layers of filth. In the corner, a cage held 4 kittens, alive but trembling, their eyes wide with silent cries for help. One officer nearly slipped on what looked like spilled food, but it wasn't food. And then came the freezer. It hummed like any other, but the moment it was opened, the room seemed to freeze with it. Inside, wrapped in stained towels, were tiny, lifeless bodies, kittens stacked like forgotten groceries. Why would anyone do this? One rookie whispered, almost afraid of the answer. But it wasn't just cruelty. It was something deeper, something twisted. And the man who caused it all was sitting quietly upstairs. Stephen Glantz didn't resist. He didn't run. He didn't even speak when the officers found him sitting on the floor of a bedroom that smelled like death. Around him were cat carriers, some empty, some moving. The walls were covered in faded photographs. His wife, smiling, holding kitten. One officer stepped closer, and Stephen finally looked up. "I didn't want them to be alone," he said. His voice was hoarse, cracked like something unused for years. On a nearby table were dozens of empty pill bottles, most prescribed to his late wife. Underneath them, a journal, its pages scribbled with dates, names, and something else. Sketches of cats with wings. "I saved them," Stephen muttered. "They were meant to stay." The officers shared a glance. Was this madness? Grief? Or something darker that he'd convinced himself was love? One thing was clear. He believed this was mercy, but looked a lot like hell. When investigators opened Stephen's journal, they weren't expecting a ledger of lives. Each page listed a name, a date, a short sentence. Found under bridge, too small to fight, wouldn't eat. There were nearly 100 entries. He named every cat, even the dead ones. There were prayers scribbled beside some. Others had drawings, halos, stars, cages with open doors. This wasn't hoarding. This was a religion. In his mind, Stephen wasn't a monster. He was a savior. He had rules. No outsiders, no vets, no letting go. He believed the outside world was cruel, that only he could protect them. But the bodies said otherwise. And deeper in the journal, they found the first mention of the freezing. A ritual, he wrote, to preserve the innocent. Investigators sat in silence. This wasn't just animal cruelty. It was a window into a man's crumbling psyche. The question now wasn't just what happened, but how far did he go? As the house was emptied, The rescue teams began to notice something chilling: scratches. Not just random ones on the floor or walls, but deliberate, desperate markings. Near the baseboards, behind the kitchen door, even inside cabinets. Tiny claw marks, hundreds of them, etching silent screams into the wood. Some cats had died, trapped in cupboards, others locked in the basement. It was as if Stephen had slowly lost control of the very creatures he swore to protect. Some neighbors came forward, finally speaking of cries in the night. Windows blacked out with newspaper, the overwhelming stench in summer heat. "We thought he was just old and sad," one woman said. "We didn't know, but the truth had clawed its way out." And now, the entire neighborhood was forced to ask, how long had they lived beside a graveyard disguised as a home? And what else was still hiding behind those walls? During the final sweep of the property, the team discovered a locked trapdoor beneath the living room rug, hidden beneath layers of dust and furniture. When they pried it open, a cold gust of air rushed up, carrying with it a stench so strong it made seasoned officers gag. The basement below wasn't empty. It was a forgotten world. Tiny cages stacked like filing cabinets, bones scattered, old feeding bowls long dried out. Cats that had never seen sunlight. Some cages were clawed from the inside. One officer whispered they were buried alive. And there, in the far corner, under a tattered sheet, was a small altar, candles, old toys, pictures of kittens, and in the center, his wife's ashes. Stephen hadn't just lost his mind. He had created a tomb for his love and filled it with what he believed were her children. The horror was not just physical, it was spiritual, and it wasn't over. Stephen's interviews revealed even darker truths. He spoke of his wife, Claire, as though she were still with him. "She tells me who to keep, who to freeze." She never left. Investigators were disturbed by the consistency. Every answer tied back to her. His devotion had become obsession. He claimed the cats were reborn souls, returned to be saved, and that freezing them paused their suffering. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation diagnosed him with severe delusional disorder and complicated grief psychosis. But even doctors couldn't ignore the eerie patterns. Claire's voice recorded in his journal entries, her handwriting mimicked in notes. One page read, "Stephen, they're safer cold than alone." Was this madness or a manipulation? Could grief really command such horror? Or had Stephen built a world so twisted that he believed it wholly? The truth was becoming more than tragic. It was terrifying. And the cats weren't the only ones under her shadow. Audio techs recovered old cassette tapes in the basement, Stephen's recordings. Most were static, humming fridge noise, soft meowing, but one tape chilled everyone. Claire's voice, calm, maternal, unmistakable. "You did good, Stephen. They're safe now." Just like I said, experts believed it was an imitation, Stephen speaking in her voice. But one segment changed everything. The little ones in the laundry, they're ready now. Make it quick. Investigators found 4 kittens' bodies in the laundry chute, right where she said. Was it coincidence? Delusion? Or something no one could explain? The case spiraled from cruelty to spiritual psychosis. Stephen believed he was guided by love, but his love spoke in commands of cold death. The district attorney prepared charges not only of animal cruelty, but of ritualistic abuse. But the city whispered something else. They said that sometimes at night, when passing that house, you could still hear her voice softly calling his name. Stephen's trial gripped the nation, not for the gore, but for the grief. His defense argued mental illness, a man shattered by loss, clinging to memory. But the prosecution showed photos of freezer kittens, the altar, the tapes. This was not love. This was control. This was death. Witnesses cried as they described the cries of cats through the walls, the smell, the silence they ignored. Stephen sat emotionless. When asked if he regretted anything, he said, "I regret not saving more." The courtroom fell silent. Experts debated if he was evil or sick, but for the cats, the verdict had long been decided. As the jury deliberated, animal rights groups held vigils, not just for justice, but for awareness. Because Stephen wasn't a monster from storybook. He was real. He lived among them, and the horror of Sycamore Street had become a mirror to what society chose not to see. Stephen Glantz was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison with mandatory psychiatric care. The house was condemned, sealed, and eventually demolished. What once stood as a monument of grief became an empty lot, a silence too heavy to forget. The surviving cats, rescued and rehabilitated, were renamed by the shelter staff. Hope, Mercy, Echo, each carrying a new chance. But the scars lingered. The rescuers still dreamed of the freezer, the voices, the basement of bones. One officer left the force. Another adopted 2 of the oldest cats. The house was gone, but what happened inside it lived on in whispers, in documentaries, in courtroom archives, and in the hearts of those who'd ignored the cries. On Sycamore Street, grass grows again, but some say the air still carries that scent on summer nights. And sometimes, if you're quiet, you can hear a freezer humming, even though there's nothing left to freeze.